can you confirm that your intelligence services have had contacts with the IRA?
I'm sure it's not right, but I should be in contact with my country, and I'm sure it's not right.
Therapy.
It just relaxed me.
Yeah.
And it got out all my inner thoughts of past things that happened to me.
Such as?
I saw a gentleman having a heart attack in St James's Park when I was very young. And he was very large. Well, I remember him as being very large, and I thought that if you got fat, you'd die. So I wouldn't eat. I wouldn't eat back then. This was when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
But you didn't know that at the time until you had the therapy?
Yeah. And then I went, actually, after that, I was so scared. I only went for a few sessions in the end, and then I went into a clinic in Birmingham for about 3 months, and this was the end of last year. And to begin with, I got worse, actually, when I was in the clinic, because I had all different types of therapy, art therapy, beauty therapy, group therapy, you name it, and I've had it. And to begin with, I just got so confused, I didn't know what was going on. But eventually, I started getting a lot better.
And are you better now?
Yeah.
Has it worked?
Oh, yeah.
Your eyes are shining, shows it, isn't it? You're eating, are you?
I'm eating.
Properly.
Normally. Proper normal food.
What about you, Rachel?
I eventually had a good experience, but my initial experiences of therapy were quite... I'm really concerned about using the word abusive, but that's what it was, I feel. I was a heroin addict, and I went into a treatment centre, and it was run by therapists and counsellors. And because I had a history of sexual abuse, they felt that, and I see now they were probably right, you know, I had a self-worth that lived below ground level somewhere. And I know that this was all tied up in the abuse I received as a child. And they kind of insisted that I work on this, but retrospectively, I think that the way they dealt with it was really abusive. I was asked to relive, you know, reenact situations, you know, that I'd kind of told people I'd been abused before. I'd always known I'd been abused. It's not a false memory thing, you know, I was always aware of it. And when I went into treatment, this particular woman, she got me to trust her. You know, I really trusted her, and she asked me to trust her, and she, you know, and I did. And she said that what she was going to do would help me, you know, it would help me. And what she did was she got me to reenact specific incidents that happened to me in front of a group, in a group situation with other addicts. We weren't all sexually abused, you know, it wasn't all...
What were you reenacting?
Well, I'm not prepared to go into that now, because it's still, you know, it's
in general
painful.
terms? Well,
we're talking about reenacting actual, you know, situations of events in detail. Distasteful. Yeah, of course, distasteful and very painful. But more than that, it was the humiliation, and the fact that, you know, this counsellor, this therapist, stood on a chair to make herself as tall as the member of my family was against me, and, you know, and asked me what happened and played it out, you know, piece by piece. And that was one, you know, situation which...
What did you feel then?
I mean, I call it my exorcist experience, you know, because it comes from a sort of an idea that they used to do therapies like this in the 70s, and it's called the kind of concept or Minnesota method, and it was about breaking you down to build you up, and, you know, but when you've been, you know, I was involved in prostitution and heroin addiction, and, you know, massive neglect of my son.
And yourself?
And of course myself. I was 6 stone 10 when I went into treatment, you know, suffering malnutrition.
So when you've had all that, you don't want somebody
exactly.
else telling you you're worthless.
Is, I go in, when I went in down there, I was, you know, I was broken. There was no need to take me down any further.
Is it dangerous when people behave like this? Can therapy actually be dangerous, do you think?
I was really shocked at what this young woman had to say, and I have to say that it's one of... we will be going on to that later, but it's something that must be examined under the later thing that you want to talk about, to do with regulating people. Yeah. But my experience of therapy has been extremely positive, and I wouldn't even be able to have attended this studio today if it hadn't have been for my therapist and what I'm moving through and still moving through. But when I hear stories like this, it makes my gorge rise. Because I know that therapy, if it's a good therapist, in the right and properly regulated, somehow, I know that it's invaluable and it can bring a new life.
And has it always been invaluable for you? It's always been positive?
Well, I used to be a counsellor. I used to counsel on eating disorders. And what I often found was that the eating disorder was anorexia, for example, might be the problem that a person was actually presenting with. And you may have to actually stop at one level and say, well, this person, we know there's underlying things here, but if that person is not ready or prepared or willing to enter that, then as far as I'm concerned, there is no way that anybody should be imposed their feeling that, well, I think you're ready to do this, as she had to go through, and force your opinion on that person who's wanting help.
Caroline, is it helpful, positive?
Sorry.
Therapy?
Yes, it is. I mean,
What happened to you?
I had a nervous breakdown about 5 years ago, and I went into therapy for 3 years, and it's been an enormous strength for me.
In what way?
Well, it sort of cleared out all the cobwebs of the past and everything, and uprooted things that, you know, I discovered things that had happened in the past that wasn't in my conscious mind, that had been embedded in my subconscious mind, and it all rose to the surface, and clearing all that out, I was able to sort of move on and think in a positive direction and a positive life. And I'm in my 3rd year of a psychology degree now, and I want to go on to be a therapist in years to come, and I'm nowhere near ready, or, you know, I wouldn't even dream of going on to be a therapist unless I'd had about 4 to 8 years training or whatever it takes. And I think that's the problem. I think people...
But for you, in your own experience, it was a positive experience.
Very positive.
And beneficial
still
for
is,
you.
Yes.
Is it always positive and beneficial, though, do you think?
I think it's downright dangerous myself. I was in therapy for different therapies, different treatments for over 10 years, and I became suicidal at the end of those treatments. And one particular therapist would encourage me, because a therapist is basically dealing with his own morals or his own values. And this one therapist, he told me that if I fancied someone, that I should explore that relationship and become intimate with them. Well, I was already depressed to begin with, so by following his advice and his guidance, which I'm sure he was well-meaning in it, I spiraled downward in my depression, and I nearly committed suicide. And the only thing that turned things around for me was hearing a fellow named Roy Masters on the radio. The trouble is, therapy is very expensive. And when I got help, it was for free. All the money I spent on therapy, the therapies didn't help me. So I'm now suspicious of anybody that charges high prices for their services. In my area in Surrey, there's been 2 children, well, 16 and 18, that have committed suicide in the last 2 months. And I live on a council estate. And I don't feel that there's enough therapy available for the people that don't have money that really need it.
But you're saying in your case it was dangerous.
It's very dangerous. But if it was available to all, in other words, by people that were doing it because they cared about helping people, not to make money.
Dangerous, Marjorie. Marjorie?
I don't think it is dangerous. It can have no effect. I think one of the things that therapy does is it just plain doesn't help, so there's a blockage. I was very sorry to hear, I mean, that experience up there.
Rachel.
That is not, was from Rachel, not so much perhaps necessarily, although I don't quite know, something absolutely wrong with that technique, as it was at the wrong time and it was forced on someone who wasn't happy to have it. Because what one is trying to do in therapy is to reintegrate, to allow people to contain the things that were so frightening they had to split them off. Now, there is one approach which would take it much more gently than that and would allow it to happen in its own good time. The kind of Gestalt approach, some people like that kind of psychodrama. Some people actually will volunteer for it. But if it's not right for you, you don't need it forced on you. And obviously the approach was wrong for Rachel and it shouldn't have been.
Why are you nodding your head?
Because I think the mind-body approach is very interesting. I've always been interested in alternative therapies, but I do feel that a therapist will only take us into areas which they feel comfortable exploring themselves. But I've had the experience that if a therapist stirs up feelings of early trauma, then when you start experiencing the feelings and they come up, the therapist will then dump you. They finish therapy. Or I've had violence. I had one therapist beat me up. He nearly gave me concussion because I fell in love with him. I was getting into feelings of anger and he couldn't handle it. He just dropped me after 3 years.
Marjorie?
Well,
that was an alternative therapist,
I'm
a
very
Reichian
interested
therapist.
to hear that, in fact, that it is actually probably more common that therapists cannot cope with sexual abuse than that they invented, which is what we tend to hear quite a lot more about nowadays. But I would hasten to add...
cope.
I wasn't talking about
Cannot,
sexual abuse.
well, cannot cope with the...
He's the therapist. What do you mean he cannot cope? That's
No,
what he's
he's
there
actually,
for.
no, he can't handle it. I mean,
But he's got a patient who can't handle it. He's supposed to be sorting out the patient who can't handle it. What do you mean he can't
there
handle
are
it?
not well-trained and well-analysed therapists there. We admit there are people who should not be out there doing it. And some of them cannot understand their own limitations, put it that way round, and they can do damage by abandoning people. So it's a negative damage, if you like.
What were you saying? You were getting
violently beaten up by a man, a therapist who I fell in love with. This was in 1973.
Physically beaten up?
Yes, physically. Almost. I was really hurt.
What, were you addicted to him or something?
I
Can you
was.
get
I
addicted?
couldn't stop going to see him, absolutely. I was obsessed with him. I thought he was amazing. I thought he was God. He set himself up as such a power figure, and he seemed so caring and sympathetic. I was sort of seduced into this amazing person, and then he became extremely violent. He couldn't handle my feelings, which he didn't like, or to do with anger.
And what's
fear.
how do you know, does a therapist know when to stop?
Well, my name's Martin Newman, working at Neal's Yard Therapy Rooms in Covent Garden, and yes, a therapist does know when to stop.
advertising?
Yes, I do. I
Oh,
advertise.
you advertising? No, because I don't understand why you said that, because nobody else has introduced himself or their wares. It sounded like an advert, that.
Well, I totally believe in what I do.
Okay.
I work with a lot of people. I see people just now on recommendation and through good old yellow pages. But I made sure that I went through therapy first, dealt with all my own stuff as far as I could before I started treating people. And therefore, I treat people for sexual abuse. I treat people
But we're
for
talking
all
about,
sorts
do therapists know when their clients are getting addicted or becoming obsessed? Or is there a point where you know where you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be taking this far? Do we understand what's going on?
There is...
Well, should know, but do they know?
There is a relationship between therapist and client called...
Hang on, Marjorie. Marjorie's talking.
There's a relationship between therapist and client called transference, where the client may see the therapist as some sort of person from their childhood, let's say a person who looked after them or something. That can also be turned into a negative point where the client becomes angry towards the therapist for stuff that other people have done to them. This can happen. But unless the therapist has been through therapy first, it's extremely difficult for them to handle it.
I feel that I was client damage, for want of a better word. I wasn't physically abused, but I had a lot of traumatic incidences in my life. 24 operations, brain surgery, my sister died, an awful lot of losses to cope with. And I sought help from a counsellor, and within about 2 sessions I'm saying, my sister died and I've lost my identity and I've lost my job. And she said, did you used to masturbate as a child and do you enjoy sex? You know, I wouldn't like to think that I was sending anybody with a sexual problem. She didn't even know if I had a sex life. I don't know why that came into it.
It happens sometimes that therapists haven't, when they haven't dealt with their own stuff, sometimes it's possible for them to think, or to know unconsciously, yes, I've been sexually abused.
Well, it certainly wasn't my frame of reference. It certainly wasn't within my frame of reference.
Therefore, if a person hasn't dealt with their own stuff, if the therapist hasn't done that, it's possible for them to put their own
voyeurism
problems
Certainly
onto the
voyeurism,
client
I think
themselves. And this can...
It's humiliating, what the young lady over there said. I can totally relate to that. I felt humiliated, which made me feel less powerful, which rather than being able to take control of my life and help me, was making me weaker and hurting me.
You go there with a low self-esteem and feeling low, and you can do without all this.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with everybody.
How can you do that?
Oh, it's easy. Because, you see, I think you're talking about a power relationship. I don't mean that the therapist wants necessarily to have power, but as soon as somebody is feeling vulnerable and goes to see somebody else and asks them to help them, they give that person power. And any relationship like that is potentially open to abuse. And whether it's doctors and patients, whether it's ministers, whether it's the government or TV presenters or whatever. And
presenters don't have power.
And the situation, I don't actually agree. I mean, I was a psychoanalyst at one stage, and I do think you learn something about yourself when you're doing that sort of training. I don't agree with this concept that you deal with all your own stuff as though you've kind of dealt with it and you're then a kind of properly cleaned out person. And that's why I actually very much agree with what Marjorie was saying, that what is needed is a context in which the therapy is open to scrutiny, where other people can see what's going on, where there can be supervision. And of course, this is what's happened much more in the kinds of therapy, which I'm also associated with, where people are trying to work with people's actual lives, for example, with their family context, with their marriages and so on, where you can at least have somebody else directly seeing what goes on. All of these situations can be abusive, and I think one has to recognize that, and I actually agree regulation is necessary. It is beginning, but we need pressure on governments to actually take over.
Let's come back. We'll come on to that. Does it cause problems? Does this therapy, going to a therapist, can it cause problems?
Well,
we're talking about a power relationship. As Alan said, you're ceding power to somebody who is put up, in second Rachel's case, somebody who's clearly taking a very authoritative position by standing there in a position of power. Can it cause problems instead of solving them?
Well, I'm quite sure it can, because in that situation, if somebody's coming to them with problems in their lives, they are vulnerable to a number of things, including suggestions. And in my own case, when I'd heard that my daughter had been to therapy and was accusing me of having raped her over a period of 10 years from the ages of 4 to 14, thereabouts, I was appalled because I didn't know where to turn. All the power was in the hands of the therapist. There had been no responsible coming to me and asking me, what's going on here? After all, we were being accused, and many other people have been accused, of terrible crimes, as well as
How did you first learn about the allegations?
Indirectly. Very often other people know about it. There's talk and whisper, there's talk in the family and so on.
So when did you first hear?
About a year ago, a little more than a year ago.
And the allegation in specific terms was?
That I had raped her.
What did you feel?
Terrible, terrible, terrible.
Is it true?
No, absolutely not. Not anything like that either. In other words, it wasn't that I hadn't raped her, but I'd done something else. I had done nothing like that at all. Absolutely nothing like that.
So why would she think these things?
Well, of course...
Where's she going to get it from?
Yes, indeed. Where does she get it from? That is the problem that people like me face. Where do they get it from? I mean, that is something that I want to know too, which is why I've joined the False Memory Association. I want to know why all of these people have been accused of things which they, I think, I'm convinced in most cases, haven't done, and yet these allegations are coming up.
But on the other
hand... What are you thinking? I'm not going to leave you there. Your sigh and your silence was more eloquent than words, but what are you thinking?
I'm just surprised that his daughter would be saying that she was abused from a very early age till how old?
From the age of about 3 or 4 till early teens, yes.
I assume the police in that were involved.
No, they weren't, not at any stage. In fact, if I may tell you this, when my daughter was about 15, there were problems in the family. I mean, there was a history of disturbance, and there are in many families, and many of these children who are going to therapists later on have perhaps come from families where there may have been difficulties. I took the family off to therapy. I would have had to have been addicted to Russian roulette to have done something like that.
So why did she go to therapy in the first place if it wasn't about child abuse?
Well, she was suffering from ME, and I think there were a number of difficulties in her life. And I was actually, this is an irony, I was jubilant when I heard that she might have been going to see somebody, a therapist or a counsellor. I thought she's going to sort things out in her life, perhaps get onto an even keel. And it didn't happen like that at all. It was just explosive and destructive.
Sue?
Terrible.
Sue?
I'm disturbed by what you're saying. You're making it sound as if lots of people are making allegations like this that are not true. In my experience, I was sexually abused within the family, and as a teenager I was rebellious, taunting, running away. There were lots of things, and my whole family saw me as the bad one. And when I left home at 16, I was extremely vulnerable and I got into a lot of trouble. And all of this convinced the family that I was a liar and a thief. And so when I was seeking help, nobody would believe me.
Yes.
And so... And it was very difficult for me to tell people in the first place. So to hear you making this sound as if it's so easy for somebody to go to a therapist and be... have this idea put into their head, and then they're going to sort of, you know, I find that incredibly hard to believe, actually. And with the false memory syndrome, I wonder actually who has false memory syndrome. Because my family has forgotten that I was abused as a child. And in fact, I found out when I confronted them that they knew I was being abused when it was happening. But they've managed to forget.
Yes, yes. Well, I can't answer an individual case, of course. I have only sympathy for somebody who has been abused and has a continuous recollection of this. I'm talking about something that is, has happened certainly in this country in more than 300 cases where families, sometimes out of a clear blue sky...
Marjorie.
You half know, if I may be allowed to say so, and I don't want to make any comment on your own particular case. You know a bit about yourself. You do not know that if there are 300 members, there aren't 278 of them who are abusers, who are pathological, who aren't facing up to what they're doing. And you see, the drift of your argument was that your daughter, who came out of a disturbed family system, put it that way, goes to a therapist, and the False Memory Society people will have you believe that it's the therapist who, out of nowhere, injects, brainwashes this sense of having been abused in the child. Now, it may well be that some children, we have always known, and adults, do have delusions, put it that way around, except there's a real danger in saying that patients who are deluded and are maybe persuaded by the therapist to take it too literally, because that was what held in sway for 70 years in the analytic profession, that abuse didn't happen literally. It was all inside the head, it was all symbolic. And I think this is quite right, that you do an awful lot of damage to the False Memory Society, as far as I can see, because you attack innocent people. You put children at risk in court, because the false memory is produced. No, is produced as a weapon to bulldoze. No, but can I also say?
Let's stay there. Don't say an also, because you said a lot. I'll come back to you, Marjorie. But let him come back on the main point. You said he's talking rubbish, and you're talking about putting his child in a vulnerable situation in the court. Let my friend reply.
May I say this? That we are particularly vulnerable when there are false accusations of abuse, because there is such a widespread backdrop of assumption that nobody would make accusations like this.
I must say, we did ask all those people who are referred to today who have made these kind of accusations if they'd like to be here. They had the opportunity, and they're not here. I'm not saying they had to be or they had, but I'm just saying we gave them the opportunity. Alan?
They would have been mad to come.
They would have, well, I don't know.
I think so, because, I mean, the thing about abuse is that once a person's been abused, they don't feel free of the abuser once it stopped happening. They don't often feel free after the person's died. Yeah. They go on feeling as though that person has power over them. And I would, if anybody had asked my advice, who'd been in that predicament, to come and speak up here, I would have strongly advised them against it.
I'm sorry, I disagree with you entirely. I've had a young girl who was taken to a therapist, and the idea was implanted in her that her parents abused her, molested her, the rest. There was no truth in that story at all. It's taken me 2 years to get that girl back to being comfortable with her parents, being comfortable with herself. It's devastated the family, and there was no truth whatsoever.
You see, I'd like to come back. I'd like to come both to your question and to the point of the father who sent his daughter off for therapy, or was very pleased that she was going to be.
I didn't send her. She was going.
You were
to
pleased that she
went.
was going to be straightened out, which implies that she was bent in the first place, in that she needed to be straightened out. I mean, I would wonder why he wouldn't go if there was a problem in the family. Why wouldn't he go with her? Why wouldn't they go and sort it out as a family?
Well, I mentioned that there was...
Oh, hang on. It's my friend is being attacked. He's got to respond. Please.
She's now 27.
Hold on, go on.
She's now 27.
You're talking to the doctor quickly.
Yes, she's now 27, and this is something that she was supposed to have forgotten about for more than 10 years before recovering. I didn't send her off to therapy. She went of her own accord. But when she was a younger girl, in her teen years, we went as a family to therapy. And I'm suggesting that if I had done these things or anything like it, I wouldn't have wanted that to have happened.
The burglar doesn't call the police.
Well, indeed.
You're saying?
Yes,
by analogy.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, unless he's a very clever burglar, of course.
Well, the little boy is often first at the scene of the fire.
Sorry, you were talking to Alan and Marjorie.
Sorry. I want to clear up this point about the false memory.
You won't do
There's
that.
no such thing as a false memory. We are all memories. I mean, we are individuals and we are full of memories. That's what makes us who we are today. And I know from my association with psychotherapists, registered psychotherapists, that the only thing they want to talk about, Robert, is the fact that they see 80% of their cases as child sexual abusers.
This is not true.
This is what they've been telling me. And they have a... No, just please. They have a perverse perception of what society is like, because everybody that comes to them is labelled, your problem is child sexual abuse.
Absolutely not true. Most therapists are deeply sceptical. I mean, really, they will tend to push it away and say it really is something else. I'm sorry, I don't mean to attack, because it may well be that you are terribly innocent.
Don't bring it back in now, otherwise my friend is in the hot seat all the time.
Can I make one...
I'm going to let you come back in. Janice, I mean, does it cause problems? Are there problems about this? Do you take it seriously?
My son went to therapy when he was 23. He was depressed. I sent him rather to a psychiatrist when he was 21 because of his depression and his unhappiness. We talked about it. He didn't know why he felt depressed. He went to a psychiatrist a few times, who I knew anyway, and he was a very good psychiatrist. He stopped going. He then went to a hypnotist. So I sent him to start with. He then went to a hypnotist on his own back. After the first session, he came home and told me that she'd taken him right back into his childhood and something dreadful had happened to him when he was 2. He went quite a few times to see her, but he stopped talking to me about what she was saying to him. He later accused me of sexual abuse when he was 6.
How old was he when he accused you?
23.
Sorry. What did he say to you?
He went mental. He said I sexually abused him. I couldn't believe it. I said, where on earth have you got all this from, Nicholas? What on earth's the matter with you? You're ill. And he said it came from the therapist,
What
from the
did you say?
hypnotherapist.
What did you say?
I was devastated. I took an overdose.
What did you feel?
I just couldn't believe what he was saying. We had such a wonderful relationship.
Is it true?
No, it's not true. He said I sucked his penis twice when he was 6, and on the second time I did it, I put a pillow over his face to smother him so that he wouldn't tell his father.
Did you suck his penis?
No, I didn't.
Did you put a pillow over his face?
No, I didn't.
You can put your hand on your heart.
I can put my hand on my heart.
You know, don't you? You're the one.
I do
you know that. You know the truth.
I wouldn't be here today.
Janice, you know the truth. You're the only person that really, really knows the truth. You're looking at me directly in the eye. You telling me that he's made this up, or somebody else has made it up, or it's been plucked out of... Why would a son... Look at me. Why would a son want to accuse his mother? I wouldn't want to accuse my mother of that.
There were problems. I had a divorce from my first husband, his father, that he never really got over. But we always had a good relationship.
Why would he want to do that then?
Maybe, I don't know. He wanted a reason for his depression.
What's it done to you?
It's just devastated me.
You're the therapist, aren't you, Pam?
Yes, I am. You've really put me on the spot here, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well...
Look at Janice.
Yes, I can look at her and I can say to her from the bottom of my heart that nothing of that sort happened when he was with me. I promise you. He was my client. I cannot discuss his case with you. It isn't possible. But I can promise you again from the bottom of my heart that nothing happened in that respect.
Did you not ask him if he'd been sexually abused?
No, I didn't. No way would I do that. As therapists, we do not do that.
You're not supposed to do it.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Was this done under hypnosis?
It was, yes. Again, this is a confidential thing.
Was it done under hypnosis, or
yes,
was it
was.
Because being a survivor of sexual abuse, there are, the facts are that you go into denial. It's the only way that you can survive, and more especially being a male.
Can I just say,
now,
he had no memory of this until he went to you.
Absolutely nothing whatsoever happened in my chair. I promise you. I cannot give you any more categorical
well, where did he
than
get it
that.
from?
I have no idea. I have no idea, but it didn't
But
happen.
we know that people like you do that kind of thing, don't we?
Yes, that is true.
Because they say they do.
That
they
is
tell
true.
us they do. That's part of their skill,
The
of
client-
how good they are. I can tell you things, Robert, you didn't know about yourself. So we do that. In a normal situation, you would be saying, look at me, Robert, aren't I clever? Janice's son didn't know what happened to him, but I brought it all back. How is it now that when we're confronted with the evidence of it, suddenly what somebody would say, look, it's evidence of my success, didn't happen?
It's not a
I'm
success.
talking to... No, it's Pam that's being...
Yeah, I'm under fire
No, come on,
here.
Okay,
I'm
Pam, let
under
me
fire.
explain. Pam is capable of looking after herself. Let's not
suppose so.
patronise Pam.
Thank
Pam, if
Pam.
Robert's therapist tells him that he knows things about himself that he doesn't know, then I wouldn't recommend his therapist.
Right.
And I think that the whole
that what they
question
do?
of therapists...
Isn't that what they do?
It
Isn't that what
is.
they do? Alan, go on.
Yes, it is. In my opinion, I've
We're not talking about who you recommend. We're talking about the people who practice.
They do, yes. And I had a lady
Hang on,
recently.
hang
I
on.
had a couple of ladies recently, and
How many
I
cases
often
do you
go
wanna hear?
through where people. We go through a session. I don't just do this sort of therapy. I do aromatherapy as well. And I usually say to them, "Is there anything that's bothering you?" And one lady said to me, "Well, yes. As a matter of fact, another therapist, I think she'd been in America, told me that I was sexually abused as a child." And I said, "Well, had you been sexually abused?" And she said, "Well, I don't remember anything about it." So I said, "It's likely then that you haven't been abused." So she said, "Well, no, because you can squash these memories." And I said, "If that were the case, you'd know you were blocking something." In my opinion, I do think it's irresponsible, and there does seem to be a trend. In America, they've ruined people's families' lives, and I think it happens to be a trend at the moment. This is the latest thing. People come to us very, very vulnerable, and they're looking for answers.
Pam.
So any
Right.
answers we can give them.
Okay, all I can... Could I just come in here, please? Could I just come in here, please?
Can you please tell us where you were trained?
I was trained here and I was trained in
In the
America.
States?
Yes, I was. All I can say, again, and I'm under fire here, is that nothing happened. Nothing happened of that
You
nature.
say you can take people back to the womb.
I can take people back to the womb. It is possible. Every hypnotherapist can take people back to the womb. It's not just me.
Well, people can
Do you do it?
from the womb.
It is possible to do it, yes.
You say you can. It's possible. Why
it
didn't you
is
do it in
possible.
that case then?
This is confidential, Robert. This
Okay.
is a client of mine.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'd had my daughter phone me on November the 17th last year. She's 55 years old now, and she accused my husband of sexually abusing her from the age of 7 until she got married. Mind you, the therapist didn't know that she didn't get married till she was 29. So in other words, for 22 years, my husband was sexually abusing her. And I knew all about it, and I did nothing about it. I just stood by.
This is the allegation, you say.
This is
Yeah.
the allegation. The truth is my husband wasn't even in this country. He was in the army, in the Sudan and in Israel. And he didn't come out of the army until Pauline was 9 years old. Added to that, from my kitchen window you can see the National Children's Home. She could have gone there and reported it. There's 100 families on the estate I live. She could have gone to one of those. She could have gone to a school teacher and reported it.
Go on.
Could I just come back here and just justify, if you like? I am here as a therapist to help people, and I look at Janice as I say it. I'm here to help people. And
well, can you help my son now then?
Yes,
Because he
I
hasn't
can.
spoken to me for
okay,
2 years.
So why hasn't he come back to me? But I don't want to get into an
What's your
argument.
training?
I trained in
You've
America.
got very vulnerable people here.
Yes, I know.
Very
I know.
fragile. That's why they're there.
Yes.
And they may be fragile anyway, per se. What's your training? And you're dealing with the most kind of precious and fragile thing
Yes.
about them, which is their mind.
Yes, yes.
What's your qualifications?
I'm a chartered master hypnotist and a chartered master hypnotherapist.
What's a chartered master? Which Royal College of Surgeons or
No,
psychiatrists?
I'm a trained business studies teacher to start off with. I went into hypnosis from there. I've trained with the Proudfoot group in Scarborough.
What are they?
They are a college of hypnosis. and
What do you do at this
psychotherapy.
College of Hypnosis?
We train to be hypnotherapists.
Who trained you?
The people there, Mr. Proudfoot.
And then what qualifications do you have? When I wanted to go and study something quite straightforward, like economics at university, I had to have A-levels and a scholarship in those days. We all had... What qualifications do you have? What qualifications do you have to have? What qualifications do you have to deal with those kind of things?
Are you having a go at me, Robert?
Yes, no, I'm trying to find out what qualifications...
You said yes.
No, come on. We know what a dentist is. We know what a doctor is. We know what a gynaecologist... We know what their qualifications are. What are your qualifications, Pat?
I've told you. I'm
Okay.
a certified master here.
What are yours? What are yours, Martin? What are yours?
If we get into this
Hang on.
bash the therapist game, you avoid...
What are yours, Martin? What are yours? What are yours, Martin?
I qualified through the International Association of Hypnoanalysts, and I'm very proud to say that I did.
Tell me about your training.
Right. I took 2 years to go through therapy, first of all.
So that's part of your training, is going
Yes.
through therapy. Is Pam, please. Pam,
I then-
please. Please. Please.
I then took 2 years to study my course and to look around and to see what the world was like.
Where was the course?
I studied, it was mainly a correspondence course.
How much did you pay?
Around £500.
What were you Did they ask you what your qualifications were?
Beforehand,
Yeah.
I was taken on as any person could be taken on from the street.
So, you went to this college, where is it? Or the institute?
It's down in Bournemouth.
And it's a correspondence course for a couple of months or a couple of years, whatever is appropriate. You pay
Lectures
£300.
lectures are involved as well.
You've got letters after your name?
Yes, I have.
What are the letters?
I'm also a qualified massage therapist now.
And what are they? What are the letters?
I'm also very proud to say that as well. MIAH.
Are we safe in your hands?
I was.
Correspondence course.
This lady is a product...
What are you saying?
This
What are you
lady-
saying? Yeah, what did you say to
I'm
Michael?
just saying...
Martin?
I'm just saying that it strikes me as a slightly odd situation where you end up with people practising on your mind who've done a £450, including VAT, correspondence course. And I'd like you to speak to Celia sitting opposite me because she can relate to you
Hang on,
exactly
let me
what
come to
happens.
Celia. We'll come to Celia in a minute.
But you've
And
actually
Martin,
chosen...
I want Alan. I want Martin to respond. Then come
You've
on.
actually
Most
chosen
of my-
to bring to your studio predominantly people who, however good they are, would be defined as fringe therapists.
Most
and
of
you've
my
chosen to
clients-
examine
There's an awful
therapy.
lot of them.
Well, there are
Can I
also an
just-
awful lot
can
of
I just
non-fringe
say-
therapists, and there's a large...
Can I just say that
there is,
most of
no,
my
I,
clients
I,
come
the
to
United
me
Kingdom
having
Standing
been
Council
to
for Psychotherapists,
psychiatrists,
which now has
having been to-
73 different groups, is in fact a regulating body. The question about
would love
regulation
to be
does need to be discussed. I agree with you. But I also think that if you bring up memory, you might be interested in some research. In looking at children who were abused, who actually were taken to emergency rooms and were abused, looking at those children 10 years later, and there's been one prospective study, between 30 and 50% of those children, as adults, did not remember the abuse.
Hang on.
And so if you're going to talk about false memory syndrome, you need to also talk about false forgetting syndrome, which affects the abusers as well as the abused.
Yeah, of course we are.
There are many abusers.
And we're not actually talking about that per se, are we? We're talking about other things we may well talk about. We are talking about people who call themselves therapists.
Right.
Who put letters after their name.
Yes.
Who go, right. And whether you think that is evidence of what's happened, there's an amazing amount of evidence, isn't there, Celia, about the number of people. This isn't a fringe, is it, Celia? There may be people like Alan, there may be people like Marjorie, but there are a lot of other people doing all kinds of things. Tell me about them, Celia.
Well, I did a story in hypnotherapy for a programme I work on and went to visit a series of hypnotherapists who all had letters after their names and they, were members of an international association. They all seemed very legit. You ring them up. I mean, I don't know what's legit and what isn't because there was no national recognised qualification. So I went
Precisely.
along. There was
That's
no,
the first thing.
No,
Right.
there was no
There is
recognised
this
qualification.
year for the first time.
Well, it's not in existence at the moment. So
It is this year.
Now?
Yes. The United Kingdom Standing Council is now in existence as a regulatory
Yes,
body.
but it hasn't actually. That's a steering group at the moment. Is now.
No, it is the council.
Anyway, go on, Celia.
Anyway, so I went to visit these hypnotherapists to see what would happen because obviously there's a lot of concern about untrained, unskilled people messing around with people's heads. And sure enough, in one of the sessions I went to, in the very first session, this gentleman didn't know very little about me at all. He put me through a series of very traumatic experiences, like being totally underwater, surrounded by fire, really horrendous experiences, and lastly accused me of having a very guilty secret, that when I was a child, I allowed a grown man to interfere with me and to touch me, and I should think of somebody that should spring into my mind in connection with that, and that person should stick there. And what kind of suggestion is that to put to somebody who is under hypnosis, who is suggestible,
And more importantly than that is a vulnerable person. They are asking for help.
And even if it had happened, it was blaming you.
Exactly.
I agree with that.
So what should we do?
People are
How
out
do we
there
protect
doing
the
that.
public? That's what we're talking about. It's all...
Well, then you should have a programme on regulation.
What should we do, Liz?
Well, I think what we should do is we should have one national register for all counsellors and therapists, which is compulsory. And having said that, if I
How
could
many
just...
would qualify for... How many of the present so-called... Because they're calling themselves therapists.
Well, I think...
And you see, I would have thought that people like Alan and Marjorie were the ones who'd be more angry than me about it, because it's you that's tarred by the same brush.
Robert, if I could say that
it is used as a smokescreen. I mean, that's what really worries me, is the bad therapists are a great argument for all sorts of things.
Yeah, go on, Liz.
I mean, most of them actually, in our experience, would qualify. The complaints that we have about therapy to mind are primarily people who can't get it, and actually in psychiatric services, people who've been abused and aren't listened to and are not given space to talk about that. That's the main problem. The problems we're talking about here are very important, significant. A small number of therapists who are abusing their power.
What do we need to do? You want to register?
Yeah,
How do we need to regulate? Don't we need to lay down what qualifications are? I mean, I was saying on another occasion, very similar one, we lay down quite clearly what a lorry driver can do in terms of the hours he can work, and he has to pass a test, a universally acknowledged test.
This year, did you? You did hear that it started this year.
But it doesn't apply to
But it's not by law. It's not regulated.
Okay.
I don't know of any Act of Parliament which does it. I don't know of any Act of Parliament lays down the qualifications for entry into the profession.
The government's policy is we will have no policy. The government has chosen to have a policy, which is we will have no policy on psychotherapy. So it's the government we need to start.
I didn't miss here. I was right. There is no regulation. We're talking about the law.
All the qualifications in the world can't ensure somebody's practising as a very good therapist. As I say, I felt damaged by... I was very vulnerable at the time, and this sexual connotations were given to me, as this lady says, out of nowhere, when I was in a very vulnerable state anyway.
Don't you feel you should be regulated?
Yes, I do, and I wish we were. I really do. Well, what I must say is most people come to us as a last resort. Once they've been to their doctors, once they've been prescribed the Valium and whatever, once they've been to their psychiatrists, and once it's failed.
But they're autonomous out in the community, aren't they? They're autonomous therapists out in the community. They can take their work if they choose to a supervisor, but where does the client go to?
There are
Where
good
can
people...
complaints go to?
We, personally...
Answer that.
I'm insured.
Where do you complain? Where do you complain? I know where to complain against the doctor. I know where to complain against the TV presenter. I know where to complain against the journalist, radio, the television. Where do you complain against the therapist?
If I do something with one of my clients which the client wants to sue me for, he can. I am protected by professional indemnity insurance.
It doesn't make things better. It just doesn't make things better.
Should we have should we be having therapy? I mean, after all, do we need therapy, do you think?
No.
You don't? Why not? Hang on. Go on.
I had to see a therapist for 14 years of child abuse. This wasn't in my mind. It happened, and it was by my dad, and he went to prison for this. He pleaded guilty. Now, I have seen many therapists, and I admit, the first thing, they didn't know nothing about me, and they said child abuse straight away. That's the first thing they thought about. Now, I found that I got very ill when I went to therapy, and I couldn't cope with my feelings. They brought all these feelings out of me that were very horrible, sent me home an hour late, and expected me to cope with them, and I couldn't. So I became depressed, I became suicidal. So I decided not to go to therapy. And the day I became better is the day I accepted what happened to me, and the fact that, OK, what happened to me happened. I can't change the clocks back. I've got to accept that. The day I accepted it was the day that I got better. Now, I have recently had a baby, and I suffer from postnatal depression. What do they bring up? My past. Every time.
Alan, should we have therapy? I mean, is it important to us?
Well, I feel that since the extended family has broken up, most people that we know are divorced these days. I believe when they had grandparents, that they could go around, talk to granny, talk to grandfather, the wisdom of the old.
That was the kind of therapy.
Sometimes it was the family that was the problem.
And now you say we need somebody to substitute for them. We need to substitute
That's what it is. It's a substitute.
Grandparent. More than that, though, isn't it? Isn't it more than that? Therapy work?
Without a doubt, because if it wasn't for therapy, you'd still have one more sex offender walking the streets actively. It's because of that I started off the classic circle. I was a victim. I became an abuser. And it's because of therapy at Grendon Prison.
What kind of abuse?
Sexual abuse.
Right. Adults?
I was
Of adults?
abused as a child, and then I carried that pattern through into my adult life, and I became the abuser. It's because of what I had at Grendon, group therapy, along with psychodrama that Rachel went through, with skilled, qualified therapists who knew what they were doing, that I'm walking the streets today safe, and I can hold my head up proudly because I've beaten the problem. All right, it'll be with me for the rest of my life, but I know I will never go back to offending again because of therapy.
Therapy's made you safe.
Yeah. I mean,
therapy has made other people safe from you.
Exactly. All right, it's like anything. You point a loaded gun, or you put a loaded gun on the table. That gun in itself is not inherently dangerous. It's got to have the trigger pull to do the damage. And so with therapy, it's not the therapy that's dangerous, it's the therapist. It's the practicer.
And the importance there is to have a practitioner, you used the words, that is experienced,
knows
trained,
what they're doing,
knowledgeable, and skillful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is what's important.
Oh, absolutely.
Take care of yourselves. Have a good weekend. See you on Monday. Thank you.
In fact, because of the bank holiday, Kilroy is back on Tuesday morning. Kilroy is looking for people for 2 programs. For the first, should people be allowed to take part in dangerous sports like boxing? And for the second, what do you think of the success or otherwise of the Child Support Agency? For either program, call Kilroy now on 081 977 3344.